This Acer Aspire 315 is currently the most popular Windows laptop on Amazon right now. The only system beating it out is actually the M1 version of the MacBook Air. Now, it's a little surprising to see such a huge price difference between number 1 and number 2, where here number 2 is essentially almost a third the price. But let's see what exactly gets sacrificed to actually hit the relatively low price point of this system. And hopefully we could find out what exactly makes a system like this so popular for a general audience. And well, at the heart of this system is a Ryzen 3 7320U APU. That is a 4-core, 8-thread Zen 2 based APU with the Radeon 610M graphics. Now, these graphics are not exactly great since it's only 2 RDNA 2 cores and it has a clock speed of 1900 megahertz. While it's a pretty decent clock speed, the fact that it's only 2 cores on the iGPU is effectively going to make it useless for any kind of intensive 3D gaming. But we will take a look at some of the games that you could actually run on a system like this, but let's be real. This system has 8GB of LPDDR5 RAM on it. That means it's non-upgradable RAM, so you are forever stuck with just 8GB. Now, to be fair, this is not that different from the #1 selling laptop on Amazon right now, the M1 Mac, since that one only comes with 8GB as well for almost 3 times the price of this system. And really, while 8GB is not really impressive at all by today's standards, and I consider it to be pretty anemic, at the price point that this is selling at, in comparison to all of its competition within its price range, they're all pretty much stuck rocking either 4GB of RAM or 8GB of RAM. And look, if there's ever any time you should listen to anything I say, it's now when I tell you that you should never pick up a system with only 4GB of RAM. Almost always these systems end up having soldered RAM, or at most you can only expand to these awkward numbers of RAM where if you throw in an 8GB stick in there, now you're dealing with 12GB of RAM, so you have a mismatch going on there. Or you could just put in a 4GB stick and now you're only at 8. And you had to buy a separate stick to get there. There's just really no reason to pick up any system that only comes with 4GB of RAM, because if they're willing to sell you a system with that lower RAM, they really do not care about your experience using the system at all. So everything else is going to be sacrificed. But if we take a look at the entire package in general, the overall construction of this system is what I would expect from something at this price point. It's plastic. It doesn't feel extremely strong or anything like that, but it doesn't feel flimsy at all. Really, the biggest selling point of this system at this price point is the fact that it actually includes an IPS display. We've taken a look at a system with the exact same chip here that was, to be fair, cheaper than this system, but that came with a TN panel that effectively made the system practically useless to use. This Acer Aspire with its IPS display is a lot more enjoyable to actually use, and it really seems like Acer made some good decisions on the things to prioritize here. For one, the display, which is the thing that you're always going to be looking at on a system like this, being an IPS display actually means that it's usable. Though the biggest downside of this IPS display more than anything is just the fact that it is pretty dim. It does not get very bright at all. And if you try to use this in an extremely bright environment, you're going to have a tough time seeing the actual screen. But because it's an IPS display, it doesn't have the same washed out look that you would see on a cheap TN panel. So overall, it's kind of a win on the display side, especially at this price point. The APU in here also is, while on paper not exactly a great performer, I mean 4 Zen 2 cores is pretty old at this point, and the integrated graphics in here aren't exactly the most powerful thing on the market today. In fact, it's so low end that AMD will just throw this integrated graphics onto their desktop CPUs so that they can at least display something and run basic hardware acceleration, but outside of that, you're not really getting much of anything else out of this. But again, yes, the APU in here is significantly slower than that M1 Mac, but again, that is almost 3 times the price of this. And if you look at the competition that this system has around its price range, it's abysmal, the specs that you'll get. On Amazon, we're looking at systems that are rocking Celerons and Pentiums versus this that actually has 4 full Zen 3, or rather Zen 2 cores. And here the integrated graphics in here actually start to be a lot more competitive, because while it's an absolute disaster in comparison to what else is out there on the AMD side of things, at the price points that this is competing at, equivalent Intel systems are rocking integrated graphics on Celerons or Pentiums, which means they are extremely cut down and extremely limited in terms of their clock speed. So again, while the APU in here isn't exactly impressive in the price point that it's at, it's actually one of the best performers by a huge margin. One thing to note is that there is a Ryzen 5 version of this, that being the Ryzen 5 7520U, but this is not worth getting at all. The price difference is not worth it in the slightest, because the only thing that is happening is a clock speed increase on the CPU. It's still the same core count, still same amount of cache, and the exact same iGPU. And also the system comes with the same memory configuration that is also LPDDR5, which means it can't be upgraded. So you'll be spending more money for what is effectively not really going to be that meaningful of a difference in terms of performance. With a system this low end, you're not exactly going to be doing extremely heavy tasks where an extra 100 megahertz is going to make any kind of a difference for you. So save the money and get the Ryzen 3 version. Now, one of the best inclusions that I've seen on this system for the price point is the fact that it actually does have a full function USB-C connector. What that means is we're getting display, we're getting power, and we're getting data over it. Now, keep in mind, this is not a Thunderbolt port, so you are not going to be able to hook up an external graphics card or use any kind of PCI enclosures like that or anything like that. This is just USB 3.2, but still you will get the charging, you will get the data transfer, and you will get display over it. You just don't get the support of PCI over it. In general, really rock solid, considering that a lot of systems in this price point also don't even include basic USB-C ports, let alone a full function port. Now, in terms of actually using the device, well, the keyboard is okay. It doesn't feel incredible. It's pretty mushy in a lot of ways, and I don't like the feel of the keycaps, but it's passable, and the fact that it does include the number keys on there is a plus for me. It makes mapping hotkeys and things like that a lot easier, so I always appreciate their inclusion, especially since this is a 15-inch laptop. The trackpad is better than what I'm used to seeing in this price range as well. It does beat out the Lenovo that I've taken a look at before, and it is leagues better than anything that I've gotten from those gateway laptops. So for the price point, the trackpad honestly is not that bad. Obviously, you're not going to get the same experience that you would on something like an XPS or a MacBook Air, but this is, again, still better than what is around this price point, and that's really its main competition here. And so far, it's becoming very apparent why this is dominating the Windows market, because it really seems like there are mostly just people buying laptops at around the $300 to $400 range. And at that price point, this is extremely competitive because of the fact that you actually have those full 4 Zen 2 cores with hyper-threading, or rather SMT, so you do get 8 threads in total. There's a lot of performance to be had out of this system. While most systems that have things like Pentiums and Celerons will hit almost 100% CPU usage just while the system is booting up and apps are opening in the background, this system, in terms of the entirety of the CPU, it will rarely hit all 4 cores at once. Most of the time, you're going to have just 1 or 2 cores doing most of the work, and you'll have the other 2 cores there just in case if anything else is going to be done. So because you have that extra headroom, it really makes the entire experience of actually using the system relatively decent. But when we actually take a look at what's in this system out of the box, things start to become a lot more disappointing. First of all, when we actually have the system on and everything, the amount of memory that we have available to us is, of course, only 7.2 gigabytes. Because, of course, some of it does need to be reserved for the iGPU and things like that. But because of that, just idling on the desktop doing nothing, the system ends up eating 4.6 gigabytes of RAM. So we're already at 64% of RAM utilization, and nothing is really running in the background. Now, saying nothing is running in the background is a little disingenuous because, of course, Windows always has things running in the background, and it doesn't help that this system does actually come with a decent amount of bloatware. Now, it's nothing egregious, and very few things are actually set to auto run, though it is annoying that when you start the system for the first time, it asks you if you want to install McAfee, but at least it doesn't come with McAfee already installed. It gives you the option to choose whether or not it's in here, but I worry that a lot of people out there are going to think, well, I might as well activate it, and you really don't need it. Windows Defender will do just as good of a job, if not better, because it's already built into Windows. It's just somehow more efficient than any of these third-party antiviruses, and it doesn't tend to slow down your system the same way that something like Avast or McAfee actually end up doing. So definitely some negative points on the inclusion of McAfee, though at least it isn't pre-installed. But there's your usual assortment of manufacturer specific things on there, like the Acer product registration. But there really is just unnecessary things on here, like there's no reason to include Evernote or Dropbox Lite. And there is an assortment of pre-downloaded games on here, things like Solitaire from third-party developers. But in general, there isn't anything overtly egregious here. This would be an absolute fail if McAfee actually did come pre-installed. The fact that you at least get the choice is nice, but I hate its inclusion in general anyway. At least with all of the bloat in here, it really can be gotten rid of really quickly. And I do recommend just wiping Windows with any system that you get out there. As you might have seen recently, I did a video talking about how Ace Magic systems were coming with preloaded malware. There have been more reports on Reddit of people that have gotten systems and they have had weird stuff installed on it. Now this could happen with pretty much any system out there because you yourself are not in control of the supply lines. You don't know who has gotten a hand on your system before it actually got to you. So I always recommend just wiping Windows. As long as you reinstall the same version of Windows that you were on already, you should be activated. So if you're on a Windows 11 home system, just reinstall Windows 11 home and you'll be activated. If you try to install something like Professional when you originally at home, it's going to ask you for an activation key because your system is not activated for that version. I will say though that one of the most egregious things that I saw installed on here was actually the inclusion of an apps explorer. Now I never bothered to launch this or anything like that. It just is there, and I'm hoping it's not a third-party app store, because if it is, that's a huge red flag. Because if you know anything about computers and their history in general, you know that even first-party app stores like the Google Play Store or the Microsoft App Store have had issues with malware being distributed on there. And these are first-party sites. Now imagine a third-party app store by a company that you've never heard of. I don't know who Sweet Labs is, but I certainly would not trust anything that I'm downloading off of an app store of theirs. So again, I don't like the inclusion of that on there, and the fact that it is pre-installed is a huge issue. But so far, it hasn't come up on anything for me, and it wasn't on the desktop or anything like that. So it'd probably be pretty hard for a user to actually find this. But again, the inclusion of third-party app stores, huge red flag for me. But really, getting onto the actual performance, the CPU performance on this system is actually really great for its price point. If we take a look at just the Cinebench R23 results for both the multi and the single core performance, this system thoroughly defeats any modern Pentium equivalent or Celeron equivalent CPU, which again is the price points where it's competing at, and a lot of its competition is actually older chips than even the N100 and N95, which means that if it is thoroughly defeating those chips, which are currently Intel's most powerful at that price tier, then things like the N6000 are going to get absolutely demolished by something like this. So the price to performance ratio of a system like this is actually pretty impressive. But as I said, the iGPU in here is really one of the biggest letdowns, and it's just the fact that it isn't really that performant. Now, if you're looking to play light games like Balloons here, or play things like Stardew Valley, you're going to be able to do that perfectly fine. 2D games are going to run pretty damn well on here. But if you are willing to play older 3D titles, you can actually get some pretty decent performance in a game like Left 4 Dead 2 here running with what it defaults to, which is always essentially around the high graphics settings. I really didn't have to adjust much of anything, and the performance was pretty great. But of course, this is a pretty old game at this point, and that's essentially around the level of performance that you should really be expecting to get. So again, if you're someone that is looking to play older titles or lighter titles, you're actually going to be able to do that on here, and that's pretty impressive for just how cheap this system is. But again, it's not a gaming powerhouse by any means. Really, it's just the day-to-day usage and activities that you would normally actually do on a system like this that it does a pretty great job at. The fact that it has an IPS display means that using it just to browse the web is not going to be an annoying task where you have to look at this washed out TN display and you're kind of just wishing you could hook it up to a monitor. That's not the case here at all. Again, the display isn't bright, it isn't incredible by any means, but it's pretty decent. And at the price point that it's at, its main competition is a lot of the times coming with some displays that are truly abysmal. So by being remarkably unremarkable, the system itself actually makes a really solid argument for its usage in comparison to most other systems at this price point, and I think that's the most impressive thing about it. It really is to the point right now where its main competition is really making some huge sacrifices in a lot of different areas, and this isn't really doing a lot of that. its biggest sacrifice is just the amount of RAM that's in here. And for day-to-day usage, it is perfectly fine on Windows, really. You don't actually need that much RAM if you're just looking to browse the web and watch videos, do your homework, doing things like that. It's going to be all doable on here. And the fact that it actually has 4 cores and 8 threads means that you can throw some pretty relatively heavy workloads onto here and you're going to be perfectly fine. I could almost promise you, if you're going through a computer science course right now in college, a system like this would be pretty much all you need. You're going to be able to compile code on here because you're not programming anything ginormous while you're in school. That's just not what you're doing. The compiles are going to be relatively quick as long as you don't get a system that is rocking a Celeron or a Pentium. This will do a solid job for that. So after using this system for the last couple of days, I really get it. I understand it's not remarkable in a lot of ways, but that's when you compare it to just the entirety of the laptop market. When you actually compare it to its competitors, things like even the 3rd best-selling system or 4th best-selling system, there is a huge compelling argument for why you should go with this instead of anything else. And while there are systems out there where if you spend a bit more money, you're going to get meaningful gains in terms of performance, I think that this hits a nice balance of performance per dollar. The biggest downside that I have with it really is just the included bloatware, which you can deal with by reinstalling Windows, and the fact that the SSD that it comes with being only 128 gigabytes is really limiting in today's market. Just out of the box, the amount of usable storage was around 75 gigabytes. And that's not a lot of storage to really do much of anything on here unless you're someone that lives in Office 365 or in Google Docs and things like that. If you're actually looking to store anything on this system, you're going to be better off buying an SSD and throwing it in there. Even a 512 gigabyte SSD would make such a huge difference in this system, and you can get those for relatively cheap. Of course, if you're someone that's buying at this price point, that might be asking a little too much, or you might just not feel comfortable actually opening the system, and that's perfectly valid, in which case you could always use an external SSD to get more storage. Of course, now you're carrying around a little thing that's going to hang off your laptop all the time, but it really just comes down to your personal use case. In general, I kind of came into this expecting to be perplexed why people would buy this over any other laptop, but for the price point and what you get out of here, it nails a lot of the points that the average user really wants out of a laptop. So honestly, I give this one a pass. So let me know what you think about this system, or if you're an owner of it and what your experience has been with it. But I'll catch you guys in the next one.